Sir, you can start.
I can start? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. This is a class MPSE 009, Canada, Politics and Society. This is as part of the MEMID, a master uh, degree in Migration and Diaspora Studies from IGNU. This is the first class, and we'll have completely five more classes, including today it will be 6 classes. We'll meet every Sunday from 3 o'clock onwards. In today's class, basically we'll talk about more introductory kind of things, an overview. Today I will take care of first 3 units, unit 1, 2, and 3. I think in many ways, these 3 units are introductory and also sometimes very overlapping from unit 1 to unit 2 to unit 3. The settler society, the staples economy, how Canada was formed initially, then constitutional act, some of the important ones, particularly 1867 and 1982, and in between number of small and mini acts and developments that took place in the shaping of the Canadian Constitution. And the third unit, the parliamentary federal institutions, because Canada is known to be a model federal polity. Many countries in the world, including India, Australia, and many countries, they adopted the federal pattern based on Canada, because that is considered to be one of the role model and kind of benchmark in terms of the federal patterns that we see in different form of government. And we'll also see the checks and balances, the bifurcation among the executive, the legislative, and judiciary. So that will constitute basically the first class today. Then in next Sunday, we'll take care of 4, 5, 6. Then we'll go into more details, the intergovernmental relations, the fiscal federalism, because federalism comes into many different ways, the good governance, different apparatus of good governance, public administration, bureaucracy, political parties, pressure groups, interest groups, policy recommendations, etc. Then we'll go to the class 3, which will take care of NGOs and social movements, particularly in the sectors of globalization, gender issues, which are very significant and germane in contemporary times, environmental issues, climate change, global warming. The other issues which are very important for, particularly for Canada, is Aboriginal issues. The old tribes, they lived in Canada. There are still quite a number of them in some of the provinces, which we'll discuss in great details, and how they've been demanding for self-governments, then civil society in Canada, in which ways they shape and different policies, different formulations, and how that has affected the government functioning in one way or the other. Policy developments and different service delivery systems in Canada, including in different provinces. Then we'll go into the language issue, culture, and politics, particularly taking care of Quebec, which is a very distinct province because they have got emphasis on French language, on French culture, which is very unique and very distinctive. The ethnic, racial issues and multiculturalism, as well as regionalism and provincialism. Because if you look at both the Atlantic coast as well as the West Coast, you see a lot of divergences as well as convergences in terms of regional variation. In class 5, we'll discuss about immigrants, refugees, and minorities, which we'll also discuss about the increasing role of the diaspora in Canadian society and politics in most of the states, particularly in the last 40, 50, 60 years. And the liberal internationalism that they have adopted into their and co-opted into their constitutions, the human security agenda, different aspects of human security, Canada in the international political economy, how they have adopted, how they have co-opted in some of the important bodies, whether it is WTO, G20, G8, and many other ways. And final unit, which will be unit 17, which will be taken care of in the final class. We'll discuss basically things back home here, India and Canada partnership between India and Canada. And I think maybe some of you can chip in because there are a lot of things that has happened between India and Canada in recent times, particularly last year and the year before, during G20 when Justin Trudeau was the prime minister, a lot of things happened which was not very pleasant, to put it very mildly, and we'll discuss that, and how things look today, and what is the way forward from now onwards, next 5 years or next 10 years, in the short term, to the medium term, and to the long term. Why Canada is important for India and why India is important for Canada. I think we'll discuss that in the final minutes. So let us move on to the introductory levels. I think for the people who have basically very limited idea about where Canada is, or maybe they have no idea about Canada. Okay, I think I'll just give you some very basic information. Maybe some of you know a little bit, maybe you will know a little bit more when I speak about it. I think in terms of geography, it's a very huge uh, canvas. This is the largest country in Western Hemisphere and the second largest in the world. As you all know, the largest country in terms of area, in terms of territory, it is Russia, the huge mass, okay, from Siberia all the way touching to Sweden and Denmark in Scandinavia. So Canada is a huge area. If you look at Newfoundland, and if um, you go to British Columbia all the way. I think if you take a flight, for example, I remember whenever I used to go to US, the first time the flight after crossing the Atlantic in transatlantic way, it touches Newfoundland, it touches Nova Scotia, then come towards Ontario, then come to New York and Illinois, Chicago, etc. So if you fly, let us say, from Halifax, Nova Scotia to the west coast in the Pacific, uh, to Vancouver, okay, it takes about 6-7 hours. But if you fly from Toronto or Ottawa or Montreal or Halifax, any of those places on the eastern side, to London, to Paris, to Rome, to any European major hub, Brussels, it takes literally same, maybe little less, maybe 6 hours, the entire Atlantic Ocean. So you can imagine how vast and how big the area is on this side to that side, on the east to the west. There is a lot of historical evolution, the demography, nature of society, which has undergone a lot of changes, particularly in the last 50, 60 years since the end of World War II, and particularly since 1960s and onwards. That has also affected in economy and culture. And basically, it was, I think, the settler colony in the sense it was mostly the two countries, major countries in Europe. They basically managed the Canadian politics and society, and even today also. Those two countries are namely are French and Great Britain. And because it used to be a colony of Great Britain for a long, long time, and still, if like for example, the first time I went, I'll give you a personal experience. I went to a store in Canada in 1983, which is a long time ago. And you see all the souvenirs, all the shops, they're selling the photos and the key rings, and a lot of those small, tiny souvenirs kind of things, all in Queen Elizabeth, Duke of Edinburgh in those days. Okay. Today, I think if you go there, you see Charles, Williams, and all those things. That is still a heavy emphasis, heavy cultural impact of the British culture, popular culture in many of the provinces, particularly in this eastern side. If you go to places like Quebec, like cities like Montreal, you see a lot of French uh, French items, and particularly all the signboards. Once I was driving in Montreal, and I had a very tough time because all the signboards were in French, and I can't speak or read French. So I have to ask somebody. And many shopkeepers in Quebec province, particularly in the city of Montreal, which is the largest city, there is some level of linguistic chauvinism. They are very proud of French language. If you ask, for example, what is the price of this particular items, and I would like to buy this one, okay? So they will immediately ask you, please speak in French. I mean, they will speak in English, but they will ask that you should expect to tell in French. So that shows the depth of their emotional connect, in a way, you can say, about their affinities toward French language. Canada attained Dominion status, and it has been a evolutionary process. Just like, I think, if I can give you, and those of you from India, I think all of us, most of us, I think Domingo is from Mozambique. I think in India also, when the Britishers were here since the end of the Mughal era in the since the Sipai Mutiny, 1857. Then I think onwards, 1909, Marley Minto reforms, the Government of India Act 1919, that is again another step forward toward granting self-independence or dominion status. Then Government of India Act 1935, diarchy, provinces and states, again another step forward. Finally, the independence that was granted in 1947. And even after independence, a lot of people still do not know probably, we still retained the British Governor General, Lord Mountbatten, for 2.5 years. Still, we had our own Governor General in those days, C. Rajagopalachari. And only in 1952, when India became a republic, we had an elected head of state in the form of Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who became the president. So even after independence in India, after 1947, we still retained the services of then British government. So he was, in a sense, you can say, the last British Governor General, Lord Mountbatten, and the first Governor General of post-independent India, and who also happened to be British, because we wanted him to maintain certain kind of continuity till we had our constitution drafted by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and his team, then followed by the election to the president. Dr. Rajendra Prasad became the president, then the first election to the Lok Sabha, onwards, so 1952, 57, 62, etc. And Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru becoming the first prime minister. So that was the history. So I think in many ways, things are very similar with Canada also. So these things did not happen overnight. It happened in stages, in a very evolutionary way. Transformation of Canada from an Aboriginal habitat to a multi-ethnic plural society. So I think it has come a long way. So places like New Brunswick, places like Alberta, Yukon territories, very Aboriginal tribes like the American Indians, the British Indians, and different the deer industries, the fur industries, for example. Those, I mean, I remember once I taught a course when I was pursuing my PhD on the American Indians, and there's a huge, vast amount of literature among the Canadian Indians, the native Indians in Canada, in US, in North America, also in Mexico, the entire North American belt, and how they have enriched that. But today, I think that has been in the pushed to the background. There are many more multicultural things that has taken place, but nevertheless, the Aboriginal tribes, like it is there in Australia, it is there in New Zealand, it is there in Japan, and many other places in the world. In terms of the constitutional setups, very broadly speaking, they still maintain the constitutional monarchy. Officially, the king or the queen of England happens to be the head of state. For example, if somebody asks you who is the head of state in Canada, the answer will be King Charles of Great Britain. But he has delegated that power to the Governor General for the day-to-day functioning. So he doesn't go to the capital of Canada, Ottawa, for signature. So it is basically delegating the power. But theoretically and in a de facto way, King Charles, or whoever is the king, and before that, Queen Elizabeth II, she was the head of state. So there is constitutional monarchy. There is a parliament in Ottawa. Ottawa is the national capital, is the Canada's capital. That happens to be in Ottawa, in Ontario province. There is two chambers, Senate and the House. They have also judiciary, which we'll discuss in more details. There are two official languages in in Canada. One is, of course, English, and one is French, because there is a big confluence of Anglophone and Francophone, and both are very, very dominant. So, if you, for example, if you apply even for a visitor visa going to Canada, you'll be asked, do you know English? Do you know French? I think if you tick both, I think the chances are of getting or granted a visa is much significantly higher. Similarly, if you're applying for a job or an immigrant visa going to Canada, if you know French, for example, or if you take, like, for example, in Lodi Road, we have got this, the French language center. If you have got French language proficiency, that will definitely be a big plus, and you get some additional bonus points for getting an immigration status or getting a visa to go to Canada. So officially, they have got two language policies, two systems of law, civil law, and also common law. There are 10 provinces there: Newfoundland, Labrador, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Islands, Quebec, Ontario. Obviously, Ontario and Quebec, they are the largest provinces. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. So these are the 10 provinces. They call it provinces. In India, we call it states. The three territories are there, which are kind of autonomous: Northwest Territory, Yukon Territory, and Nunavut Territory. And most of the Aboriginal tribes that I just spoken about a few minutes ago, they live in these three territories, which are there on the west coast, little above that. There are also a lot of big cities, metropolitan cities. You must have heard, for example, if you fly to Canada today, I think we have direct flight from Delhi to Toronto. We have also direct flight from Delhi to Vancouver. And if you want to go to some other big cities, there are many number of big cities there. Like in Alberta, we have Edmonton and Calgary. In British Columbia, apart from Vancouver, we have got Burnaby, we have got Simon Fraser. In Manitoba, we have got a big city in Winnipeg. Saskatchewan, they have got Saskatoons. In Nova Scotia, we have got Halifax. So there are many number of countries. In Ontario, Toronto is there, Niagara Falls is there, Hamilton is there, London, Ontario, Waterloo, Ontario. Ottawa, which is the federal capital, also happens to be in the province of Ontario, which is the largest province. In Quebec, Quebec City is a very beautiful place. I have been there, which is in Quebec. Of course, Montreal is very, very big cities. 30, 40 years ago, actually Montreal used to be #1 city, but what happened was in the 70s and 80s, particularly in the 70s, because of the language controversy, a lot of the big industries, they shifted their headquarters from Montreal to Toronto, so and to Vancouver also. So Toronto became #1, and you can say in a way Vancouver became #2. And today, I think Montreal has been relegated to like #3 or 4 cities. There is self-governing colonies in 1867. It attained independence only after World War I, and particularly through the Act of Westminster in 1931. In terms of multicultural, I would like to speak for a few minutes. If you, for example, today, if you like to go to a place like Vancouver, I mean, you feel that maybe you arrived in Punjab. Okay, I think there is a significant amount of Indian diaspora, particularly from the Punjab provinces, from different places. They've settled down in Vancouver. You find many gurudwaras in Vancouver and in many places in British Columbia. And they've been elected also, and in different places, in counties, in municipalities, in cities, and in all different arenas in British Columbia. You go to any big city like Edmonton or Calgary, Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, you see a mixture, a mosaic of multicultural identities, ethnic identities, what we can call it as ethnic pluralism. And I think that has definitely enriched Canadian societies in many ways. There are still, of course, some people, there is a white backlash against it, but I think overriding population of Canada, they do support multiculturalism. Canada is one of the rare countries in the world which has a federal ministry, federal government devoted to Department of Multiculturalism. It is there for the last many decades. And they take care of and they promote the multicultural activities and what to do about it. You go to, for example, you go to a place like Toronto, there is a section called Little India, there is a section called Little China, Little Greece, Little Italy. So there are different kind of ethnic enclaves there, and there is popularity. They popularize the different languages like Hindi or Urdu or Gurmukhi script, etc., etc. And you see that. You will see a church, a temple, a mosque, a gurudwara almost side by side, one after the other. I have been Canada to many times, and I can see how this multicultural atmosphere or the ambience or the environment and people live in a spirit of coexistence. Of course, there are some few bad apples are here and there, but overall, I think it's a quiet place, and a lot of people they prefer to go to Canada because they like to go to migrate to Canada because it is much easier to work there in that atmosphere. But recently, there has been some issues there which we'll discuss later on. So Canada, I think, in a multicultural setup in the schools and colleges, many places they teach also the different languages, and the government, the provincial government as well as the federal government, they do encourage the different language things. In terms of the Aboriginal tribes and the Canadian Indians, the North American Indians, they are like almost 70%, Métis 26%, Inuits 5%. Initially, when Canada was created, maybe 100 years ago, there was a big rivalry between French and the English. Ultimately, there was a big war that took place in 1702, the war in which the British won. And the French were restricted basically to Quebec and the surrounding places. In terms of the economy, agriculture, I think Canada has a lot to offer in terms of grain, oilseeds, vegetables, meat, dairy products, wheat. They have a huge boundaries, as you can see in the map, between all the way from St. Lawrence all the way to British Columbia with the United States. They produce a lot of pulp and paper. Canada is world's leading producer of newspaper products, 48%. In terms of the newspaper print, they provide almost 75%. In terms of the mineral resources, industry and trade, Canada is very rich in zinc, in potassium, uranium, titanium, nickel, lead, copper, and iron. So Canada is one of the largest producers of different materials. It is the largest trade partner in US, particularly in automobile sectors, in mining sectors, manufacture of different machineries, transportations, petroleums, etc., etc. So I think in this context, let me tell you, there has been some issues recently, particularly between Canada and US. Historically, they have got good relations with Canada and US. I'll tell you again one personal experience. When I went to US, after I got my visa from the US embassy, immediately after that, I went to the Canadian High Commission. And without looking at anything, the moment the person in the desk in Canadian High Commission in Santipat in Chanakyapuri, he just looked at my passport and immediately he stamped it. But today, I think it's much more difficult to get it because there are a lot of politics involved. The relations, particularly the bilateral relations between Canada and US, it has taken a nosedive, particularly after Donald Trump has been elected for the second time. As you must be reading in the newspaper or watching in the TV, Trump is basically would like to impose heavy tariff duties on even on the neighbors, even on the friends, even on the allies like Canada, on everything, on Mexico, on China, on many areas. So Canada is trying to retaliate also with a counter tariff, etc. So and also the personal relations and equations between the former prime minister who just left a month ago, Justin Trudeau, and Donald Trump was not very good. So that also reflects on the downsliding of the relations between United States and Canada. So relations currently at this present time between Canada and US are not very pleasant, to put it very mildly. Now we have a new prime minister called Mark Carney, and there is going to be an election next month in April 20th, 28th. Let us see who wins. By the way, Mark Carney belongs to the Liberal Party. Justin Trudeau was also from the Liberal Party. That's the leading party in Canadian Parliament in the lower house. We have another Conservative Party, which is the leading party, New Democratic Party, NDP, that is a big party also. There are also smaller parties like the Green Parties, Parti Quebec, etc., etc. So there are a number of parties, but mostly in the last 50, 70 years, most of the Canadian national politics and also provincial politics is dominated by two-party system, namely the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. And they have been occupying both at the national scene and the federal scene, as well as in the provincial scenes in different provinces. So there is going to be an election next month. Let us see how it happens. I think a lot of things will vary. Maybe things will go on an upward swing between Canada and US after the election is called, and if Mark Carney gets re-elected and gets a majority. Their system is basically like India, like whichever party or the combination of parties get a majority in the lower house, he or she gets invited to become the prime minister. So let us see who wins. And there is also an opposition leader who is also equally popular, Peter Bolivar. So let us see, who wins, the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. It is also possible none of the two political parties get an absolute majority on its own, and they may have to take the help of some of the smaller parties, some of the minor parties, like the NDP, the New Democratic parties in Canada. Canada does have relatively robust relations, vibrant relations with different countries in the world, with US, with European Unions. There is also a proposal, I think I said yesterday in the class, there is a proposal that Canada would like to be a member of EU, although it is not a part of Europe, but it is trying to be a member of EU if the EU countries unanimously decide to adopt or co-opt Canada. Canada is a member of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, along with the US and the major West European countries. And in that capacity, Canadian peacekeeping troops have taken part in many trouble areas around the world, including in Africa, in many places, in Bosnia, Herzegovina, and many other places. Canada and member of the G20, when last 2 years ago, when we had the G20 conference in Delhi, India, Justin Trudeau, then Prime Minister of Canada, he visited India. Canada is a member of G7 countries, the group of industrialized countries. Canada and China, they also have a very robust relationship. China has a lot of outsourcing things and also a lot of the trade volumes between Canada and China are at an all-time high. But there are also, again, personal issues between Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, as well as Canada, Justin Trudeau, who has been there for many, many years and who just resigned last month. And now we have a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Canada and ASEAN countries in Southeast Asia, they're also trying to expand the spheres of influence and diversify their import and export arena with all the Southeast Asian countries, whether it is Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines, etc., etc. Canada-India relations, of course, will deal with great details. Just suffice to say that Canada and India relations are at an upswing until very recently, when the Khalistani separatist movement, that was a big issue between the two countries. But I think overall, you have got a record number of Indian students going to Canadian universities. We have got a sizable Indian diaspora in Canada. They've also contributed significantly. We have got people of Indian origins holding PIO cards or OCI cards. They're also holding cabinet positions and important positions in different provincial governments in British Columbia, in Ontario, and many other countries, also at the national and the federal levels. Canada, Indian diasporic population, they have been extremely influential. They have been extremely powerful in many different areas, including in industries, in trade, in commerce, literally in every particular aspect, not only in education, but in other things. You go to any major universities in Canada, for example, University of Toronto, McGill University in Montreal, University of British Columbia, York University. I'm just giving you names, University of Manitoba. You find Indian professors, persons from Indian origin, they're holding very important positions in literally all departments, whether it is mathematics or engineering or science or liberal arts, in all different aspects. I think they have been doing exceedingly well because of their brilliance and because of their innovative attitudes. In September 2023, the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, that created a big diplomatic issues. After that, I think the diplomatic relations between India and Canada, it went for a nosedive. Both the countries, they decided to cut down on the number of diplomatic personnel. But I think in the recent times, in the last couple of weeks, the Canada's National Security Advisor has been to Delhi to discuss with Mr. Ajit Doval, our National Security Advisors, and also our External Affairs Minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar. So I think things are looking good, and hopefully things will look better in the weeks and months to come. Maybe after the election takes place in Canada and whoever government comes to power, maybe things will come back to normal between Canada and India. So I think, and also Canada also has a good relations with Russia and many other countries in West Asia, Central Asia, and many other countries. Just like any democratic polities, they also take care of the different issues. Canada is basically, you can say, it's more like a hands-off approach. And a lot of people say that they are like a younger brother of United States because the US is basically a grand hegemon. They have got overarching influence in many places. But a lot of the Canadian people, they're very proud people. They're very loyal people. They're loyal to the flag, loyal to the country. They're loyal to their culture and heritage. And number of people in Canada, they do feel offended when President Donald Trump recently he described Canada as a 51st state of United States. As you all know, there are 50 states in US, right? And he says that Canada will be co-opted just like another province. So I think this is not only a violation in international law because this will be an infringement of territorial integrity and sovereignty, but this is basically demeaning the status or the pride or the heritage of Canadian culture or the Canadian society. So I think people across the board, whether it's liberals or conservatives, they don't want to be taken for granted. They like to have friendly relations, good neighborly relations with the United States, the largest country on the north side of Canada. But let us see, how the coming weeks or coming months step out at the personal level between the Prime Minister of Canada as well as the President of US, and also between the two countries, because there are a lot of people which are involved. And also the Canadian society and American societies in many ways, they are interconnected, they are also embedded with one another. So I think these are some of the basic things I'd like to talk about, which are part of the Unit 1 as part of the settler societies, how the people wanted to come to Canada and settle down there, and trying to develop their own culture, whether it is Anglo-conformity, and gradually over a period of time, then this English culture, the British culture, and also the French culture, how it got embedded. But for example, if you go to a place like Ontario province, which is a huge one, almost like if you combine 3 or 4 states of India, that is as big as Ontario, all the way from Ottawa to Niagara Falls, to Hamilton, to Mississauga. And Quebec, that is completely a French kind of atmosphere, the restaurant, the aura, the language, the culture, and everything there. So I think that contestation is still there. There has been some efforts to bridge the divide between this extreme form of British chauvinism, English chauvinism, okay, and the French chauvinism. So there has been attempts to bridge those divides. I think to a large extent it has been successful, but there are still issues that needs to be resolved. So that is Unit 1. And any questions quickly, if I can ask anything on the broad overview on Canada? Anybody has got any questions before I move on to Unit 2?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. Silpa, Gurpreet, Sophia. Okay, let us go to Unit 2, okay? Basically, it talks about the Constitutional Act. I think you need to remember just 2 things. I think that will suffice for this particular class. The Constitutional Act of 1867 and the Act of 1982, which is pretty recent, 1982, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So that constitutes the Unit 2 of the syllabus, Canadian Politics and Societies. Mostly, I think if you look at Canada's political pattern or political orientation in the last 50, 60, 70, whatever years. It's mostly a liberal country, mostly a democratic country. It's a limited and responsible government. They respect the rule of law. Rule of law means what? Basically, predominance of law. Okay, we follow the laws. Okay, uh, and whatever the laws is there. Okay, so for example, when I was driving in Canada, okay, in US they follow the miles. Okay, the New York State, for example, the speed limit is 55 miles per an hour. When you just cross the Niagara Fall and you go into Canadian territory, okay, in the Ontario province, their speed limit is maybe 100 kilometers. Okay, so it is, if you convert that into miles, it will be like 65 miles or 70 miles. So if you speed up a little bit, you get a traffic police challan or you get a ticket for that one. So the rules are there. Okay, even US also, different states, like you're driving in New York, the speed limit may be 55. You are driving in New Jersey, it may be 60. You are driving in Ohio, it may be 65. You are driving in Michigan, it may be 70. So I think it varies. And each state, they have got their own driving licenses. So it is not uniform by any means. Okay. And Canada is definitely in another country. You need a visa. There are different rules. Ontario has its own rules. Quebec has its own rules. Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, everybody has their own rules. It is influenced by English law. The Constitutional Act of 1867 was basically to make the Constitution a federal state. A federal state means what? Federal, like in India, we say we are a federation. Okay, India, that is Bharat, is an union of states. Okay, that is Article 1. I think everybody knows that. Okay, that means we have got the center, India, and we also have the states, the constituent, 29 states. Okay, so all those things, they coexist with one another. There are certain powers which are given to the federal government on the union list. There are certain powers that are given to the state, to the state list. And there are certain things which are intertwined between the union and the states, which is called the concurrent list. Literally, the same thing happens in Canada. There are certain powers given to the federal government, certain powers given to the state government, certain powers are shared between the two sides. And if there is a conflict, the union or the federation, federal government, they prevail in certain things. Okay. So it was so this is a federation kind of thing. So it is one country, but again, one country divisible into different provinces. As I said, there are 10 provinces and 3 Indian territories across there. It was adopted by the Parliament of Westminster in London of the proposition of the 3 British colonies, United Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. Canada ceased officially to be a British colony with the passage of the Statute of Westminster in 1931. Okay, so it used to be technically a de facto British colony till 1931. Only after 1931, it ceased to be a British colony and it became a full-fledged country. Officially, the Parliament of England entrusted the power to the Parliament of Canada in 1982. So things were happening slowly and surely. As I said before, in Indian context, like 1909, 1919, 1935, then 1947, things were happening, okay, in an upward direction, but slowly and surely, okay. So officially, the Parliament of England, they entrusted the power to the Parliament of Canada in 1982. The Constitution of Canada establishes in Canada a federal system, a parliamentary form of government. As you know, mostly in the world, particularly in the democratic societies, we have got either two systems, presidential system and parliamentary system. And even within presidential system, you have got American model, you have got a French model. In American model, you have the president there, we have a Congress, Senate, and a House. Okay. In French model, we have a president, we also have a prime minister. Okay. So some countries, they follow the French model, some people follow the American model. In a parliamentary democracy, most countries, they follow the British system. Some people call it Westminster model. Like in India, we follow the British model. Instead of the queen or the king, our head of state is the president who is elected. Currently, Mrs. Draupadi Murmu is the president of India, okay, because she has been elected. After she completes her 5 years, either she can be renominated for another 5 years, okay, or somebody else will become. Like we had Ramnath Kovind, we had got APJ Abdul Kalam, we had got Pratibha Patil, I mean, so on and so forth, since 1952. because we believe in a republic. We have been elected head of state, elected every 5 years. In Canada, it is the Governor General who is the constitutional representative of the constitutional monarch. And the constitutional monarch is the Queen of England. For example, currently the head of state, you can say it is King Charles, but he has delegated that power to the Governor General to act as his nominee. And the parliament, again, just like ours, the lower house, Lok Sabha, the upper house, the Rajya Sabha, Council of States, the lower house directly elected by the people. We, the people, we elect the Lok Sabha MPs, members of parliament, okay? And whichever political party has gets the majority and the leader of that party, ipso facto becomes the prime minister, and he or she forms the council of ministers, the cabinet, okay? Same thing in Canada, okay? Last time, the Liberal Party, they fell short of the majority. They got the help of NDP and some other parties. They formed the government because they attained majority. And then he was called by, Justin Trudeau was invited by the Governor General to form the government. He formed the government. He could have literally stayed until October of this year at the completion of 5 years. But the party felt that he has become a liability because the relations with US, with India, with many countries going downhill. So they wanted a change of leadership in the middle within 5 years. That's why he resigned. There was an intra-party elections. They chose this Mark Carney, and now currently he's the prime minister. Next month on April 28th, there is going to be a national federal election in which all the people will vote. Okay? Anybody who is above 18 years of age. And let us see who wins, the liberals or the conservatives, or maybe nobody will get a majority. They will take the help of some other minor parties. So it remains to be seen. Officially, the Parliament of England, as I said in 1982, the Constitution of Canada establishes Canada federal system, parliamentary form of government, a liberal democracy, guarantees rights and freedom to the citizens. Basically, I think it again, just like the fundamental rights that is given, guaranteed to the people of India, or for example, you can take the example of Bill of Rights that was given to the people in US after 1776, when United States became independent. Then we have Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, freedom of speech. I mean, just you can go on and on, okay? So those are also very much a part of the liberal democratic ethos in Canada. Methods of amendment of constitution is reasonably difficult and complex. You not only need a 2/3 majority in both houses of parliament, you also need a 3/4 support in the states, which is possible and doable. But at the same time, it is also very, very tough. Even in India also, it is very, very tough to get an amendment unless a particular party is extremely popular in both houses of parliament, plus across majority of states. So that's very, very important. The Constitution of Canada has remained a dynamic instrument in evolving and developing along the needs of time. If you look at in terms of liberal democracy, I think you see the following feature: supremacy of the Constitution. The Constitution is supreme. So if there is a contest, if there is a particular case that comes into the Canadian Supreme Court, the Constitution is number one. Everything else is secondary. Number two, it's a multi-party systems. It is not a uni-party system. It's not like China, where you have got only Communist Party of China or North Korea. There are multiple parties. The two dominant parties, as I said, are Liberal Party and Conservative Party. But there are also other parties, the New Democratic Party, the Green Party, Parti Quebec, and many other parties. Okay. So it is a multi-party system. It is very much ingrained with the Canadian things. Anybody else can contest. Universal franchise, anybody above the 18 years of age, he or she, they can vote, they have the right to vote. You must be a Canadian citizen, you must be born in Canada. Fundamental freedoms, as I said, all the basic freedoms that people enjoy in most of the democratic societies, whether it is in India or Great Britain, Australia, Singapore, United States, that also applies to Canada. Independence of judiciary, we also value that in our country. So judiciary is supreme. Whatever the verdict they give, they have got courts at the lower levels, at the provincial levels, as well as at the federal level. So whatever the top level Supreme Court decides, that ultimately prevails over all other courts. Canada is not a republic. That's the big difference between in a democratic setup. The head of the state is the king or queen of Great Britain. Okay, so symbolically they have maintained that. In India also, if you remember, we are also a part of the Commonwealth, but Commonwealth is a loose organization of the ex-British colonies. We are still a part of the Commonwealth, but we do not give allegiance to the British king or queen. We respect Queen Elizabeth, we respect King Charles, but they are in no way connected with our constitution. Our head of state is the President of India, our head of government is the Prime Minister of India, and the Council of Ministers there on the country. So that's the embedded in the constitution. But in Canada, the head of state is the monarchy in Great Britain, and he or she nominates a person to act as a governor general in Ottawa for the day-to-day operational purposes. Rule applies there, parliamentary systems. Under the other act, which is Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982, fundamental freedoms, democratic rights, mobility rights, that is very important. You can move from one place to the other, okay, very easily. So for example, you're a resident of Ontario, you like to go to Prince Edward Islands or New Brunswick or British Columbia or Yukon Territory, you can do that, and vice versa. So that mobility rights is still very much there. There is no bar or there is no restrictions. The legal rights are completely assured. For example, there is something called Miranda doctrine. For example, you are driving a car really fast, okay? The police catches you, okay? You have the right to remain silent, okay? And the police cannot force you to give information against your will, okay? You have the right to be represented by a legal attorney, okay? If you can afford it, fine. If you cannot afford it, you will get a legal aid which will be paid for by the federal government or by the state government. So this is a legal right you have. And also, even for a civil matter or a criminal matter, it is all decided trial by jury. The jury of 5 people, 7 people, 9 people, they decide on any particular matter. Ultimately, a person is guilty or not guilty. That is done trial by jury. And this trial by jury is decided and determined as part of the legal rights of the people. Equality rights, everybody is equal. It does not discriminate on the basis of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, etc., etc. National origin, which part of the world you are coming from. Official language rights, as I said, French and English, they are the 2 official languages there. But at the same time, a lot of the other languages that people speak about, that is also being strongly encouraged. For example, I have seen many Hindi language schools in different parts of Canada. Gurmukhi script is being subscribed, but the dominant official languages are British, English, and also French. The minority educational rights, there are a lot of educational institutions that are run by minority institutions that is also guaranteed. There, the protection of Aboriginal rights. This was a big movement in the 1980s and 90s when the Aboriginal tribes, particularly in the Nunavut and Northwest Territories, they demanded that they belong to the indigenous tribes, so they need to protect their language, their culture, their heritage, their customs, etc., etc. And they have got some specific rights in that particular aspect. So I think this is all about the Unit 2. Basically, you have to concentrate on 1867 and 1982. That provides the federal pattern, and that also provides the liberal aspect of the democracy as we see in the legislative wings, judicial wings, and executive wings of Canada. Okay, the rule of law, supremacy of the constitutions, universal franchise, fundamental freedoms, independence of judiciary. I think those of you who have basic knowledge about or basic ideas about India, I think, or even United States, I think it basically rhymes or syncs perfectly with that particular, with Canadian systems. Okay. Any questions on Unit 2 quickly? Because these are very self-understood and self-explanatory. Very much it is in sync or it is in line with what we see in India. Okay. Now let us move on to the.
Sir, 1 minute, 1 minute.
Yes, yes, yes.
Sorry to disturb, sir.
Okay.
In Unit 1, we discussed about staples economy. What actually is staples economy, sir?
Staples economy means it is based on these food items and different agricultural products. As I said, I think, for example, whatever things they can produce. Okay, it's basically, I think they produce certain kinds of agricultural items. They export a lot to Latin America, to South America, to other parts of North America, including US and Mexico and other parts. Okay, so basically they produce a lot of those agricultural products, and that a lot of their economic base is based on this staple economy because they produce that kind of thing. So that is, in a way, it has, you can say in some sense, it is like a surplus green revolution, a success. Okay. Like, for example, in India, for example, I think I said in another class probably, in India, we achieved green revolution only in the 70s. We did not get that in 1947 or 50s. It took us 25 years, 30 years, and thanks to people like Norman Borlaug, the Nobel Prize winner, so we invented that one. Okay, so staples means all the agricultural surplus. Okay, like for example, the amount of wheat Canada produces, literally they can feed the rest of uh, the world. Okay, and they earn a lot of revenue. So that is part of the staples, like a food staple, like a daily staple. Like staples means what? Like you put a lot of things on my table, okay, on my plate, okay, and Canada does provide that, and that's a big trump card they have, okay, and a big surplus they have. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Can I have 1 minute pause?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you.